In the quiet aftermath of betrayal, a man finds himself at a crossroads, grappling with the pain of a shattered marriage and the realization that the life he once cherished has crumbled around him. After decades of unwavering love, the stark truth of his wife Tracy's infidelity forces him to confront not only her betrayal, but also his own capacity for resilience. As he navigates the tumultuous waters of divorce, he begins to rediscover himself, armed with the lessons of his past and the promise of a new beginning. This is the story of a man reclaiming his life, one step at a time, amid the wreckage of a broken heart. The tale you are about to dive into explores the intricate layers of infidelity and the profound effects it can have on the lives of everyday individuals. At the center of this story is Clark, a man whose life takes a sharp turn when he uncovers his wife's betrayal, leading him down a path filled with unexpected romantic and emotional twists. It all started one ordinary day when Clark received a phone call from a representative at Genealogy Gurus, the company handling a DNA test he had given his daughter as a Christmas gift. It was meant to be a fun and enlightening experience, a way to explore their ancestry and connect as a family. However, after waiting 10 long weeks for results, his excitement turned to confusion. "Sir, I can confirm that your daughter's DNA test has been processed," the representative stated, his tone professional yet curt. "However, I'm unable to share any details due to confidentiality protocols." Clark felt a sense of dread creeping in. "If it's processed, why don't the results show up on my account?" he pressed, a knot forming in his stomach. The representative responded, "There are various reasons why your daughter might not appear in your DNA matches, but I cannot disclose specifics regarding this test." The irritation in his voice was palpable. And then, as if struck by a lightning bolt, realization dawned on Clark. The number one reason why his daughter wasn't showing up in his matches was painfully clear. She might not be his biological child. With his heart racing, he abruptly ended the call, his mind spinning. The red end call button felt heavier than usual as tears began to stream down his face. He found himself curled up on the couch, lost in a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Moments later, he managed to gather himself and decided to call his daughter, Marissa, who likely shared the same lunch break as he did since they worked in the same time zone. She usually spent her lunch hours curled up with a book at her desk, so he hoped he wouldn't be intruding. When she answered on the first ring, her voice was weary yet familiar. "Hi, Daddy. How are you?" "Pumpkin, you know I love you and trust you completely," Clark began, fighting to keep his voice steady. "But we need to talk about the DNA test. I called Genealogy Gurus, and they told me it was processed a couple of weeks ago." A sharp intake of breath came through the line, followed by a heavy silence that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. "I know, Dad. We need to talk, but not now. Call me tonight, and make sure Mom isn't in the room." His heart pounded as he drove back to the office, the world around him fading into a blur. He struggled to focus at work, where he held a position as Vice President of Engineering at SEO Electronics. Thoughts raced through his mind. How could this be happening? How could his little girl not be his? Being analytical by nature, Clark knew he had to approach this like any engineering problem, one step at a time. He recalled his mentor, Dwayne Scappas, who had taught him the importance of structure and order in tackling challenges. Dwayne had taken a chance on him fresh out of Purdue University, guiding him as the company blossomed into a leader in the industry. In the midst of his turmoil, Clark remembered the good times, his wife Tracy, their beautiful home, and their 3 children who had once filled the house with laughter and chaos. Now, as the kids had grown and moved out, the house felt emptier, yet it had also revived the bond he shared with Tracy. They had managed to rediscover joy in their relationship after the kids left, yet now that joy felt overshadowed by uncertainty. Reflections of a recent phone call Tracy had received echoed in his mind. About 2 weeks ago, they were watching TV when her phone rang. It was Marissa, and the conversation was brief but laden with emotion. Tracy's eyes had glistened with unshed tears after hanging up, but she brushed it off, claiming Marissa's cat had health issues. Clark had thought it odd how personal Tracy took it, unaware that the true nature of their daughter's test was already a looming shadow. That evening, Clark tried to maintain a facade of normalcy around Tracy, despite the storm brewing inside him. Work on one problem at a time, he reminded himself, repeating it like a mantra. He had met Tracy during his sophomore year at Purdue, though they didn't start dating until his senior year. They married a year after graduation, and he always believed it was the best decision he ever made. Tracy was still stunning at 54, her dedication to fitness and health leaving her with the body of a woman decades younger. As the night approached, Clark decided he needed to make a call under the guise of a work project. "Tracy, I need to call Dwayne about a project," he said, trying to keep his tone light. He stepped into the hallway, his heart racing with the weight of the impending conversation. As he dialed Marissa's number, a mix of dread and determination washed over him. This was just the beginning of a journey that would unravel not only the truth about his daughter, but also the fabric of his entire family. What lay ahead would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the bonds that hold them together. As I stepped out onto the porch, I took a seat on the old swing, the rhythmic creaking a comforting sound against the backdrop of the evening. I needed to talk without the risk of Tracy overhearing. Taking a deep breath, I dialed Marissa's number, my heart racing at the thought of what I might hear. Marissa answered on the first ring, and her voice was trembling, a fragile echo of distress. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have told you sooner, but Mom asked me not to say anything until she had a chance to talk to you." Her whisper carried the weight of guilt. "Calm down, sweetheart. I'm not mad at you," I replied, trying to soothe her as best I could. "You're just as much a victim in this as I am." I could hear her heavy breathing through the phone, each shaky inhale a reminder of how hard this was for her. "Dad, I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us. I'm still your father, and you'll always be my pumpkin," I reassured her. "I've always given you kids my love, and that won't stop now, unless you want it to." In that moment, she broke down, her sobs coming through the line, almost incoherent. "I love you, Daddy." "I don't need anyone but you," she cried, her anguish palpable. "Listen, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're my best source for information on this mess. We won't talk about other details, so you don't get caught in the middle, but I need to know if you've had a DNA match." "Yes, Daddy," she sighed. "Amanda Anderson is my half-sister. Mandy, Uncle George, and Aunt Jenny's Mandy." A cold wave of realization washed over me. "Oh, holy," I muttered, the implications hitting me hard. "I'm so sorry, Daddy," she said quietly. "It's not your fault, Pumpkin. You never need to apologize to me," I responded, trying to keep my tone steady. This meant George Anderson, Uncle George to my kids, a respected appeals court judge, was Marissa's biological father. My mind raced, piecing together a timeline. Tracy had slept with her boss when he was still an attorney at DeHowe and Associates, long before he became a judge. That would have been over 25 years ago, considering Marissa was now 24. Tracy had been George's office administrator, and while he'd eventually moved on to become a judge, the friendship between our families had remained strong. I recalled times when Tracy and the kids had visited George and Jenny at their lake house, memories that now felt tainted. As I was lost in thought, Marissa called out to me again. "Daddy? Daddy, I'm sorry." "I'm here, Pumpkin. Just got a bit lost in my thoughts," I admitted. "Thanks for your help. Say hi to Drew for me." "Wait, Dad. What are you going to do?" It was a valid question, one that I didn't have a good answer for. "Honestly, I'm not sure, kiddo. Just don't do anything stupid, okay? A little foolishness is fine, but don't get arrested or anything," she warned. The thought of doing something rash had barely crossed my mind until that moment, but I couldn't break my promise to Marissa. I would never allow myself to end up behind bars. Calming Marissa about our relationship was my top priority, and uncovering the truth about Tracy's betrayal was a close second. The third item on my agenda was to start divorce proceedings, but I needed to find a new lawyer first since my current one worked for the firm where Tracy was employed. I would have to navigate this carefully, especially considering I would soon be dealing with the soon-to-be ex-Mrs. Clark, Tracy Walters. At home, the atmosphere felt cold. Tracy chattered nervously, as if trying to fill the silence with meaningless conversation. It was clear she was attempting to keep me happy, perhaps in hopes that it would soften the blow when the truth inevitably came out. There was a noticeable distance between us, a chasm that neither of us was willing to address. About a week later, I met with an attorney, and when she learned about Tracy's position at the firm, her expression shifted to one of nervous concern. I decided to move on to the next name on my list, a young woman who met my gaze with a calm smile when I mentioned Tracy's role. I was looking for someone who wouldn't be intimidated by the big names at the firm. I laid out what I knew, starting with the shocking discovery that my youngest child was not biologically mine, and that she was actually Judge Anderson's daughter. "So you're telling me that George Anderson, the appeals court judge, is your child's father?" my attorney, Marie Robinet, asked, her eyebrows raising in surprise. "Yes," I confirmed, watching her reaction closely. "What does that mean for our case?" "It could work in your favor," she replied, her demeanor shifting to one of professionalism. "We need to discuss financials next. Both of you have good jobs, pensions, and benefits, which gives us a solid foundation for negotiations." Marie suggested we split the joint property evenly, keep our pensions, and sell the house. "This would leave both of you in a comfortable position," she explained, "though you might end up a bit better off due to higher income and a stronger pension." "What about the judge?" I asked. "Are we going to pursue any action against him? That could complicate things." Marie hesitated, gauging her response. "If Tracy doesn't contest it, we could wrap things up in about 6 months. But if she puts up a fight, it could drag on longer." I took a moment to process it all. The stakes were high, and I was determined to navigate this storm with both strength and integrity. Whatever lay ahead, I would face it head on. It had been almost a year since everything changed, and I still didn't have any dates lined up for the big confrontation. I reminded myself to take my time and get it right. This wasn't something I could rush. Now that the third task was behind us, it was time to move on to the fourth, the showdown. I spent another week observing Tracy, waiting to see if the tension in the air would boil over. Saturday night rolled around, our usual date night, where we'd go out for dinner, catch a movie, and then make love. But it had been 2 weeks since we'd gone out, and even longer since we'd been intimate. I just couldn't bring myself to do it after discovering her affair. Marissa seemed to sense the unease. She didn't even question why our routines had changed, a clear indication that she knew I was aware of the situation. That evening, I took Tracy to a charming French restaurant. We shared a bottle of wine, and for the first time in weeks, she seemed genuinely happy. After a lovely dinner filled with laughter and delicious desserts, we returned home. I carefully took her coat off and led her to the kitchen table, pulling out a chair for her before uttering those infamous words, "We need to talk." Tracy offered a tentative smile as I poured myself a glass of Jack Daniels. When I suggested she join me, she delicately declined, the tension palpable. I set my drink down and met her gaze. "The floor is all yours," I said, my voice steady. "It was a long time ago, Clark," she began, her eyes searching mine. "George and I haven't been together in about 20 years. Can't we just chalk it up as a mistake from the past and move on?" I was relieved she hadn't outright denied the DNA test, but annoyed that she tried to dismiss it so easily. "So the last time you were intimate was about 20 years ago? When did the affair start? How often did it happen? And why did you eventually stop? I need to know everything," I pressed. "And first and foremost, are Barry and Katie really my children?" "I didn't sleep with George until a year after Katie was born," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our affair lasted for about 3 years. It ended when George decided to leave the firm and pursue a judicial career. He waited about a year after we broke up to take his first judgeship, wanting to ensure his background check would be clean. After that, we only had a few intimate moments at the lake house when Jenny took the kids out for the day. She was completely oblivious at the time, but eventually, George told her everything. We even had a peace meeting where we both promised no more intimacy." "Why didn't you ever tell me about that? Why didn't you try to have an honest conversation with me? I asked sharply, feeling a mixture of anger and betrayal. Am I just a backup plan? Tracy wiped her hands on her sleeves, a gesture that made me see how distressed she was. I knew if I told you, you would have divorced me immediately. I didn't want that. I loved you, and I still do, she pleaded. But you loved him too, didn't you? You loved him so much that you were willing to risk everything we built together, knowing I was your fallback, I countered, my voice rising. You might have loved me, but you knew I worshipped you, and you took advantage of that. Tracy lowered her eyes, the truth hitting her hard. I had struck a nerve, and I could see the hurt reflected in her face. What about Marissa? I continued. Didn't you think about how this would affect her? You were playing with fire. I thought if no one could tell they were his because of how much she looked like you, it would be fine, she replied defensively. When the DNA test came back, I thought everything would be okay because they resembled you. I never worried about it until you sent that test. So you honestly didn't know before that? I asked incredulously. George and I discussed the possibility, but I told him there was no reason to worry since you two looked alike, she explained. For all I know, he didn't know either, but I'm sure Mandy has filled him in by now. I haven't heard from him in a couple of years, since Marissa and Drew's wedding, in fact. No matter who knows what, Marissa is still my daughter, I asserted. I'm on her birth certificate. I raised her, and I love her. She is mine. George better not think he has any claim to her, and if he calls, you better set him straight. I'm also going to have Barry and Katie DNA tested as soon as possible. I need to know for my own peace of mind. Clark, I told you they were yours, she replied, her voice rising in frustration. You expect me to trust you? Trust? After everything, I snapped back. The look on her face was one of shock, and I could see the realization dawning on her that I was serious about investigating the truth. How often did you two see each other, and where? Finish the story, I demanded, my patience wearing thin. We didn't plan it, she replied, her tone softening. It just happened. We spent so much time together at work, and then we became friends. It grew into something more. He was kind, funny, passionate, you know the man. We connected on a deeper level, but because we both had families we loved, we kept things minimal and met out of town. We never met here or at his house because that would have felt wrong on so many levels. Yet you still found the time to sleep together at the lake house after the affair supposedly ended, didn't you? I said, skepticism dripping from my words. No, I swear we haven't been intimate since then, she insisted, her voice barely above a whisper. And Jenny knows about all this? I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. Yes, and she's forgiven us both, Tracy said, looking defeated. I took a deep breath, processing everything she had shared. The road ahead was going to be long and fraught with challenges, but one thing was clear. I needed to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I whispered, a mix of tension and undisguised excitement in my voice. Clark, we know what we did was wrong, but it's been over 20 years. You never had to endure the fallout while it was happening, so can't we just go back to how things were a few weeks ago? You were my loving husband, and I was your devoted wife. Nothing has to change. Things have already changed, Tracy, I replied, my tone steady but heavy with emotion. For the better part of 3 weeks, I've been wondering what I did wrong that made you fall in love with another man. Can I ever trust you again? Can I trust you enough to stay married to you? I gave you my heart completely, and you tucked it away to pull out when it suited you. This wasn't supposed to be a marriage of convenience. It was supposed to be a marriage built on total commitment and love. As the weight of my words sank in, I watched Tracy's eyes fill with tears. I hated it when she cried. Usually I would comfort her, but this time felt different. Instead, I turned on the TV in the family room, leaving her alone at the kitchen table. That night, as we lay in bed, I positioned myself as far from her as I could. When she climbed in, I didn't let her slide against me. The shock and pain on her face were evident, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Sunday morning brought a warm breakfast prepared by Tracy, but the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tension. As we sat down to eat, I knew it was time to bring up the subject of divorce. Tracy, this isn't just about a mistake that happened 20 years ago. You didn't even know about it until recently, so how can we just brush it aside and move on? She practically yelled at me. A mistake remains a mistake, no matter how long ago it was. You deceived me. You lied to me. You cheated on me and shattered my trust. These aren't minor issues. I shot back, my frustration boiling over. I pushed my chair back, leaving half my breakfast untouched, and stormed outside to mow the lawn. That was the last real conversation we had until Wednesday afternoon, when Tracy informed me that Jenny Anderson would be joining us for the weekend. I wasn't thrilled about the visit. Jenny was an old friend who had endured her own share of infidelity, and I figured it might be beneficial to talk to her. She arrived Friday evening, having driven 2 hours to get to our house. She didn't bring George, and Tracy had prepared a stuffed flank steak with mashed potatoes for dinner. I brought a couple of bottles of Merlot to complement the meal. Over dinner, conversation flowed easily, but I could sense that the atmosphere would shift once we moved to the family room with our glasses of wine. Jenny began recounting her experience with George's affair in a calm, almost clinical manner. But as she continued, her emotions surfaced, tears brimming in her eyes, and Tracy's as well. When George first told me about the affair, I assumed it was a thing of the past. He promised me it wouldn't happen again, Jenny said, her voice steady despite the tears. At first I was devastated, but the more I thought about it, I realized that since it was over before I even found out, I wasn't hurt as badly as I could have been. I knew Jenny wasn't a gold digger, and I understood how it could happen. George has a certain charm, doesn't he? I sat back listening, but not entirely convinced. I didn't know about Marissa until recently, and I'm truly sorry for that, Clark, Jenny continued, her tone shifting to a more empathetic one. I couldn't help but wonder if Jenny knew about the meetings that had taken place after the affair supposedly ended. I didn't ask, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Jenny was almost apologizing for George's actions instead of being angry with him. Unlike her, I wasn't as settled or willing to give Tracy and George a pass just because their romance had been going on for so long. Jenny continued, Sometimes I think about what my life would be like if I had left George. They say you should evaluate whether your life would be better or worse without your spouse. I know mine would be worse. Thanks for sharing that with me, Jenny. It's certainly food for thought, I replied, though my thoughts were tangled. But you have to understand that I didn't find out about the affair the same way you did. I stumbled upon the truth by accident. Tracy knew it was wrong when she did it and decided it would be better for everyone if I remained oblivious. That was the case until the DNA test revealed everything. Now, 20 years later, I learned that the woman I thought was entirely mine had loved another man intimately. Tracy sat quietly, her gaze darting between Jenny and me as if trying to gauge my reaction. She had no idea that I was aware of her silent observation, so I made a point to appear casual, even as my anger simmered beneath the surface. As Jenny continued her story, I noticed the pain reflected in both women's eyes. I shook my head, unable to listen any longer. I headed to the kitchen for another glass of wine, then returned to the family room, switching on the TV. The message was clear. The conversation was over for the day. Both women took the hint and retreated to the living room where I could hear their hushed voices. I knew I had a lot to think about, but I was also aware that the real conversations were just beginning. After watching the show, I switched off the TV and peered into the living room. "Good night," I said, and then I headed upstairs to our bedroom. On Saturday, Jenny cornered me in the family room. "We need to talk," she said, her tone serious. I had no idea where Tracy was, but I agreed, and we retreated to the formal living room, settling into 2 chairs in the corner. "Clark," Jenny began, her eyes softening, "I understand your pain. I really do. But not forgiving Tracy and choosing to divorce her would be a terrible mistake for both of you. You love her and she loves you. That should be all that matters. The past is just that, the past. Spending the rest of your lives apart over something that happened 2 decades ago would be horrible. If I can forgive George, surely you can forgive Tracy too. I shook my head, my heart heavy. Honestly, I don't know if I can, Jenny. Like I said yesterday, I wasn't told about the affair. You were. Tracy kept it from me because she knew it was wrong, and I wouldn't have forgiven her then. Why should I forgive her now? She cheated on me for years, 20 years. How can I trust her again? Frustrated, I stood up and left the room, passing Tracy in the hallway. She could see from my expression that my conversation with Jenny hadn't gone well, and I was resolute in my decision. Dinner that night was painfully quiet. The women tried to engage in small talk, but I was uninterested and barely spoke a word. After a quick thank you for the meal, I grabbed my jacket and announced I'd be at Malone's, my go-to spot for a quiet drink. When I arrived at Malone's, I noticed Ronnie, the bar owner, chatting with some customers in the far corner. Instead of taking my usual seat at the bar, I chose a table by myself, feeling miserable and undoubtedly looking worse. Mar, the bartender, came over and placed my usual Crown Royal on the rocks in front of me. "You look like your dog just died," she remarked lightly. "Sort of, but nothing as important as my dog, just my marriage," I replied, managing a weak laugh. Ronnie caught wind of our exchange and, sensing I needed to talk, walked over to my table. "Okay, Superman, spill it," she said, sitting down across from me. Ronnie was a large woman of Irish descent, with freckles and fiery red hair. She didn't take nonsense from anyone, but if trouble arose, her husband Moose, an imposing former Marine, was always ready to handle it. I'd seen him deal with unruly patrons before, and I had no doubt he could do it again. I had been coming to Malone's for 20 years, sometimes with Tracy, sometimes alone. Ronnie had gotten to know us well, and I always appreciated her straightforwardness. "Tracy and I are done," I finally admitted. Up until that moment, I hadn't shared my feelings with anyone, but it felt liberating to finally open up. "I just found out she cheated on me with her boss for 4 years, 4 whole years. Marissa is his daughter, and now she thinks that because it happened so long ago and I didn't know about it at the time, I should just accept it and move on. She claims she loves me and doesn't want a divorce," I said, my frustration spilling out. "That little cheating," Ronnie interjected, her eyes wide with disbelief. "How dare she think you'd just let it slide? If that happened to me and Moose, he'd have my back in a heartbeat." Her reaction felt validating. "Thank you, Ronnie. It's good to hear someone agree with me. I really appreciate your honest view on this. If you thought otherwise, I'd have to rethink my entire stance." "Look, Superman," she said, leaning in. "It's about respect as much as anything else. You love Tracy, yes, but her betrayal was not born out of love or respect. How could she let you believe another man's child was your own all these years?" I explained Marissa's situation to Ronnie, noting that Tracy had refused to have a DNA test done. "She didn't want to know the truth," I said, bitterness creeping into my voice. "Did she ever apologize for cheating or just for hurting me?" Ronnie's eyes narrowed. "Damn it, Clark, that woman was good. I bet she never truly apologized for cheating. I doubt she even expressed genuine remorse for hurting you. The only apology she seems to have is for getting caught." "I can't tell you what to do, Superman," Ronnie said, her voice softening. "But I think she's already shown you what you need to do. Tonight, drinks are on me and Moose. The remaining bottle is yours, and we'll call you a cab at the end of the night. Give me your keys." I did as she asked, grateful for her support. The cab driver dropped me off at my house around 2:00 a.m. Tracy was waiting at the door and helped guide me up the stairs to our bedroom. I collapsed into bed, fully dressed, and she took off my shoes and socks before settling in beside me. That night, I fell into a restless sleep, weighed down by the turmoil of my thoughts. Late Wednesday night, I received a call from my son. He wanted to discuss the situation with Tracy. Though he didn't say so outright, it was clear that Tracy had decided to enlist the kids to help talk me out of my decision. As I listened to my son's voice on the other end, I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me, knowing that the conversation ahead would change everything. Divorce is a tricky subject, and usually my son and I see eye to eye on most things. But after our recent conversation, it hit me that Tracy had put a lot of effort into her narrative. And it was paying off. Barry definitely leaned toward her side of the story. "Dad, divorcing Mom would be the dumbest thing you've done since wearing that leisure suit in the 70s, he joked, attempting to lighten the mood. Seriously, Dad? You're ready to end things over something that happened 20 years ago, something you just found out about a few weeks back? Just a few weeks ago, you said you loved her and wanted to spend the rest of your life with her. Now you're willing to throw it all away and risk being alone because of a mistake?" I felt my temper rise. "First of all, Barry, a mistake is what she made the first few times she slept with him. By now, it's a conscious choice. What would you do if you found out Linda was cheating on you? Probably go ballistic, right?" "But you didn't catch her," he shot back, his tone growing serious. "It's been over for 20 years. The physical part might be done, but the deception, the lack of respect, that's what continues." I felt cold frustration seep into my voice. "Barry, I thought you were smarter than this. You've stepped into a territory where no child should tread. You're getting in between your parents for what? I'm the one who's been hurt here, and you're really getting under my skin. I idolized your mother. She knew it, and if it weren't for that accident, I would have gone to my grave thinking she was perfect. But she used me as a backup plan when the man she loved most didn't want to marry her. Do I feel used? Absolutely." "Dad, aren't you being a little overdramatic?" Barry began, but I'd had enough. I hung up the phone, frustration boiling inside me. When I walked in the door around 6 o'clock that evening, I found Tracy in the kitchen preparing a delicious meal. She didn't look happy, and I could sense the tension in the air. I poured myself a glass of Jack and settled into my favorite chair, turning on the TV as a distraction. "What's wrong?" Tracy asked, walking in. "Same old story," I replied, bitterness dripping from my words. "My wife cheats on me for 4 years, has a kid with another man, and now our kids are telling me I'm the bad guy here. Call Kathy tonight and tell her not to bother calling me tomorrow if she doesn't want to hear what I think." Tracy lowered her gaze, clearly not understanding the depth of my anger. "After 31 years of marriage, you'd think she'd know better than to push my buttons. What makes you think the divorce won't go through?" I raised my voice, the hurt spilling over. "You cheated on me for 4 years. You had a child with another man and you replaced me in your heart. You can sit here and claim you weren't in love with him, that if he had asked you to marry him, you wouldn't have. But here's the truth. You may love me, but you're not in love with me. You're still in love with him. I'm just a safety net because you know I'd do anything for you." Tracy's eyes were wide with shock, and my words cut deeper than I intended. "You lied to me, you disrespected me, and now you're trying to turn our children against me? That's the last straw, Tracy. But I won't be cruel to you, and I won't ruin George's career as a judge. I'll file for irreconcilable differences. We can split our retirement accounts and the house evenly." Tears streamed down Tracy's cheeks as she rose from her chair. "You never told me you regretted cheating," I added, my voice colder. "Maybe because you don't regret it, which at least is honest." That night I spent the evening cradling a bottle of Jack, drowning my sorrows. The following day I called my attorney and instructed her to prepare the divorce papers as soon as possible. She said I could review them the next Tuesday, and they would be ready by Wednesday. Tracy would be served on Thursday. I made it clear that I wanted to be present when she was served, so I arranged for the server to come to my house on Friday night. Afterward, I called George Anderson's office, the judge, and asked his receptionist to have him call me back regarding an important matter. He understood why I was calling and called me back about 2 hours later. George sounded a bit apprehensive, knowing the sensitive nature of our conversation. "Yes, I'd prefer to discuss this outside of my office," he said, and I completely agreed. We set a meeting for the following Saturday at his house at 10:00 a.m. By then, I was certain Tracy would be aware that she'd be served the night before, though I didn't mention that. At Malone's that Saturday evening, during dinner, Tracy confided that Jenny had called her, informing her about my upcoming meeting with George. She wanted to know if I would accompany her on the trip. "This isn't small talk, Tracy," I replied, my tone serious. "George and I have something important to discuss, and you don't need to be there. Remember, he's an appellate court judge with a stellar reputation, possibly even a candidate for the Supreme Court. If you cause any trouble, you could jeopardize everything, and you promised me you wouldn't do anything to hurt his career." Right, because you'll always prefer him over me, she shot back, bitterness creeping into her voice. Don't worry, I said, trying to maintain my composure. I intend to keep my promise. I won't do anything to sabotage his chances. As I prepared for my meeting, I reflected on the path ahead. The stakes were high, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. The show must go on, I thought, bracing myself for the storm that was about to unfold. As I sat with my attorney going over the divorce papers, she suddenly paused, looking up at me with a curious expression. So, any plans regarding Judge George? I raised an eyebrow. Why do you care? I asked, giving her a playful wink. Because I'm still handling some criminal cases, she replied with a smirk. And I thought you might need a solid lawyer. You engineers don't get too emotional about much, but I know that your methodical approach can be intimidating. She handed me her business card, and I left her office, my mind buzzing with the implications of what lay ahead. Over the next 3 days, time seemed to blur. We had a major project at work that demanded my full attention, a welcome distraction from the chaos of my personal life. My boss even commented on how focused I was, despite everything going on. I felt a fleeting sense of relief. At least something was going right. But Friday night, as I prepared to leave, I confided in my boss about Tracy being served and the looming confrontation with George. I warned him that if things escalated poorly, I could find myself behind bars by Monday. He assured me he'd have my back and even offered to cover my bail if necessary. We parted with a firm handshake, a silent understanding passing between us. When I arrived home, the delicious aroma of dinner wafted through the air. Tracy was in the kitchen, clearly trying to get my attention with her culinary skills. She really was a fantastic cook, and part of me felt guilty for what was about to unfold after dinner. As we sat down to eat, the atmosphere was thick with tension, punctuated only by the occasional clinking of forks against plates. I made sure to compliment her on the meal. After all, I didn't want to come off as completely ungrateful. I helped her with the dishes afterward, both of us falling into an uneasy silence as we had for weeks. Just as we were about to head to the family room for a quiet evening of TV, the doorbell rang at almost 7 o'clock. I immediately sensed it wasn't for me and remained seated. Tracy shot me a hopeful glance before heading to the door. When she opened it, a well-dressed young man stood on the porch, and without a word, he handed her a manila envelope. "You've been served," he said flatly before turning and walking away. Tracy froze, her face going pale as she clutched the envelope. I could see the tears brimming in her eyes even before she turned to me. I approached her, taking her shoulders gently. "You knew this was coming," I said softly, though I felt a pang of sympathy. We moved to the kitchen table, and for what felt like an eternity, though in reality it was only 5 minutes, we sat in silence. Finally, she muttered, "You bastard," before racing up the stairs to our bedroom, leaving me standing there, heart heavy. I didn't follow her. The hardest part was done. For the first time since we got married, I didn't sleep in the same bed as Tracy. Instead, I made my way to the guest room, where I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I had broken up with the woman I had once considered my soulmate. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I took a shower, trying to clear my mind. When it was time to get dressed, I moved quietly to the bedroom, gathering my clothes without waking her. I didn't even look to see if she was asleep. I just grabbed what I needed and left. I chose a collared shirt, a decent pair of Levi's, and my custom-made cowboy boots from our visit to our son in Dallas. I left home a bit earlier than necessary, wanting to avoid any chance of being late for my meeting. I figured I could kill some time at the cafe nearby, which I did. At exactly 10 o'clock a.m., I stood on the porch of George and Jenny's house, ringing the bell. Jenny opened the door, looking lovely yet visibly anxious. "I'm sorry it ended this way," I managed to say as she stepped forward to hug me. She didn't respond verbally but squeezed my hand tightly, leading me into the living room, adorned with George's various memorabilia and photographs. George was seated in his favorite chair, but he stood as we entered. "Hey, Clark," he said, his tone casual but his eyes revealing a flicker of concern. "Hey, George," I replied, the weight of our shared history heavy in the air. Jenny quietly excused herself, leaving us alone. We stood about 6 feet apart, eyeing each other like adversaries. Once I had considered George an older brother. We shared dreams and laughter, fishing and hunting together. Now, standing before me, he felt like an enemy, the man who had taken my wife's love and ruined my life. Suddenly, an overwhelming surge of anger washed over me. "You get to keep my wife's heart, you bastard!" I yelled, unable to hold back. "You also get to keep your squeaky clean image because I promised Tracy I wouldn't say a word about this, but you won't keep your balls." Without thinking, I lunged forward, taking a decisive step and thrusting my foot upward with the intention of delivering a swift kick. To my surprise, George barely reacted in time, and my metal-tipped boot struck its target with stunning precision. He yelped in pain, collapsing to the floor, clutching himself and howling like a wounded animal. At that moment, Jenny rushed back into the room, her eyes wide with horror at the sight of her husband writhing in agony. "What happened?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. I pulled out my cell phone, dialing 911. "There's been an accident at Judge George Anderson's house," I said, my voice steady but my heart racing. As the operator's voice came through, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a very complicated unraveling. "I need an ambulance!" I shouted into the phone, my heart racing. I turned on my heels, ready to leave George's house, but before I could make it to the door, Jenny grasped my right arm. For a moment I thought I might have to push her away, but instead of panic or anger, there was a serene determination in her expression. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling me into a tight hug. "We know what we have to do." I returned her embrace, feeling an unexpected sense of connection in that moment. As I walked out of the house and climbed into my car, I felt a strange relief wash over me. I knew Jenny would handle things with George when he was ready to face the truth. The ride home felt liberating, almost like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. After months of heartache and betrayal, I was beginning to feel free. It was funny how clarity can come after realizing the extent of someone's betrayal. Tracy's hold on my heart had finally loosened, and I was able to think about what I truly needed. Yes, a part of me would always care for her, but I refused to waste another moment rehashing our painful history. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my choice. It was time to prioritize myself, just as everyone else had for the past 20 years. When I arrived home, I headed straight to the basement, grabbing a couple of suitcases. I walked past Tracy, who was sitting in the family room, her gaze fixed on me. "So that's it then?" she asked, a mix of disbelief and resignation in her voice. "Yeah, Tracy. After 31 years, I'm out," I replied, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. "I'm sorry you're so wrapped up in your own world that you can't see how you deceived me. You stole 24 years of my love through your lies. You probably don't even realize it, and maybe you never will, but I'm done. I don't hate you, and I don't even hate George, though he probably thinks I do now." Tracy looked like she was about to protest, but I pressed on. "I'll reconcile with Barry and Kathy eventually, but you should reach out to Marissa. Poor girl's a mess. Just sign the papers, Tracy. Let's wrap this up. I'll have my things out in the next few days. We don't need to drag this out any longer." I placed my lawyer's business card on the kitchen table, a silent ultimatum. She stood there, tears brimming in her eyes, but no words came. I took my suitcases and headed downstairs to my car, my heart heavy but resolute. 31 years of my life, just like that, gone. A few weeks later, I learned from Marissa that George had managed to save one of his testicles after major surgery. The news came to me through the grapevine. Jenny had been trying to reach me, but had no number to call. It turned out that no one in the family wanted to tell me. In fact, since that day, they hadn't spoken to me at all. Now, 8 months later, I've made my peace with it. According to the official story, Judge George had suffered an accident in his office. He fell on the corner of his ornate desk, not once, but twice. The press labeled it a domestic accident, carefully omitting any mention of the area that had taken the brunt of the impact. George garnered a sympathetic media response, which probably wouldn't hinder his chances of landing a spot on the Supreme Court shortlist. Tracy signed the divorce papers within a week, and our divorce was finalized just last week. The house is set to be auctioned off, and since I left, Tracy hasn't tried to call. Barry and Kathy haven't reached out either, which means I likely won't be joining the family for Christmas dinner, wherever that may be. On a brighter note, my father is handing over the company to me come the new year as he prepares to retire. As part of the deal, I'm required to run the company for 7 years before I can cash out and enjoy a very comfortable retirement. I'll even receive a percentage from the eventual sale of the company. After being married for what felt like a lifetime, I decided it was time to start dating again. It would take me a while to remember how to navigate the dating scene, but word of my divorce spread quickly. Several of our divorced friends reached out, and even a few of Tracy's friends expressed surprise that she had let me go. I have to admit it felt good for my ego. As I look ahead, I see a promising future filled with new challenges both personally and professionally. I've started exploring new hobbies, trying to fill my spare time in ways that are fulfilling and rewarding. One hobby I've given up is genealogy. I used to delve into family histories, but now I reflect more on fidelity, trust, and the value of family bonds. The experience has made me think deeply about how people cope with infidelity and the emotional turmoil it brings. It's a complex web of human nature, revealing the many facets of love, betrayal, and ultimately, the strength it takes to move on. As I forge my new path, I'm determined to learn from the past while embracing the future. This is my time to rebuild, and I intend to make the most of it.